Well, welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us today for this webinar. I'm Lily Beadle. I'm an Associate Director at the Carbon Trust, and I serve as Programme Director of the Zero Emissions Generator Initiative, which we'll hear more about shortly. I've held a variety of roles within our energy access practice at Carbon Trust and previously worked for BBOX in the off-grid energy sector. Today, we'll be talking about the reliance on diesel and petrol for energy generation across Asia and the Pacific Islands. I'm joined today by a team at Intellicap who will be talking us through their market research and taking us through some specific country deep dives. And we'll have time at the end for questions. So please do pop any questions that you have into the chat and we'll try to respond to those at the end. I want to take a few minutes at the start just to talk about the impact of unreliable grids and why we're here. Next slide, please. In fact, I think we skipped two. So many of you are familiar with the stark numbers around energy access. We know that hundreds of millions of people lack access to the grid. But next click, please. There are a further several billion who don't have full access. So the IFC puts the number at 1.5 billion people who have grid access but have experienced chronic unreliability. And these are people that work in businesses where they face losses in revenue. These are hospitals where life-saving equipment sits idle during outages, schools where digital learning is unattainable. What do people do when they can't access the power that they need? Next slide, please. Well, if they can't afford them, they turn to fossil fuel generators. These are products that are ubiquitous across the globe. Something like 80% of them sit within emerging economies. And they range from the small petrol generators that you see on screen here to larger systems that power entire hospitals, industrial processes, telecom towers, etc. And whilst they plug a much needed energy gap, there are unfortunately negative consequences to their use. Next slide, please. There are significant health impacts, as you can see from the screen, in urban areas in particular. They're very polluting and lead to significant outcomes. Moreover, the consequences when healthcare facilities can't deliver critical services are great. And these aren't just inconveniences, these can be a matter of life and death. Next click, please. The environmental consequences are also pretty severe. They're some of the most polluting and carbon intensive forms of energy generation, and in some cases can be more inefficient than a coal plant. And finally, next click, please. The economic impact is pretty staggering. So studies show that unreliable grid access costs emerging economies somewhere between 2 to 5% of GDP. And that's not just a reduction in GDP, that's a hamper on growth and investment as well. And for enterprises in particular, which in particular SMEs, which form the backbone of emerging economies, power outages mean loss of revenue, loss of opportunity, and stunted growth. So this then begs the question, well, what do we do about it? Next slide, please. So we're asking ourselves the question in ZGen, what can distributed renewable energy do to help with this issue? There are considerable efforts being made to improve and modernize grid infrastructure, and that absolutely needs to happen. But the reality is that the speed of development of traditional grid infrastructure simply isn't sufficient to serve the 1.5 billion people with clean, reliable energy at the pace that's required. So we're asking, what can distributed renewable energy do to solve this problem? Can it offer a different pathway? One that's faster to deploy, one that's increasingly cost competitive, and one that can offer greater energy security by reducing the reliance on fuel imports and volatile fossil fuel markets. Next slide, please. So ZGen is an initiative that's a collection of partners that are all about advancing distributed renewable energy in countries which currently depend on fossil fuel generators. Our goal is to mobilise 100 million for the sector by the end of 2027. And we're currently looking for partners to join us on this endeavour. And we do this through investing in innovation, setting up financial mechanisms, supporting awareness raising, and policy and standard setting too. It's co-funded by the IKEA Foundation and the Transforming Energy Access Platform via the UK government's Ayrton Fund, which is a $1 billion commitment to support clean energy research, development and demonstration across low to low income countries. So that 1 million that we spoke about feels like a drop in the ocean, but it is our intent to reach a tipping point where investment starts to flow in and renewables can take over from fossil fuel generators at scale. And a critical part of what we want to consider today is how do we make the most of that opportunity? We're seeing great progress in a range of different sectors, but how do we really move the needle on these things? So thank you for your commitment today to finding out more about this area. I'd like to invite the Intellicap team now to present their market research and discuss some of those opportunities.
Thank you, Lily. At IntelliCap, it's truly been a privilege to work with ZGen over the past 15 months, diving deep into these markets, speaking with a diverse set of stakeholders and analyzing where a transition from fossil fuel gensets to clean gensets could deliver the most impact. Before we start analyzing the 4 different APAC economies we looked at, I want to walk everyone through the country prioritization framework we employed. This is the process we use to decide which markets to focus on. So our country selection process employed a 2-stage framework. We were looking at about 27 low to middle income countries, or LMICs, in the APAC region, and we analyzed them across 25 metrics. These metrics covered critical areas such as market potential for the gensets, demand drivers for alternative energy, as well as anticipated impact of transition. Impact included impact on the dimensions of GHG emission reduction potential, health outcomes, as well as increase in livelihoods. This helped us generate an initial set of priority countries using just quantitative factors. Following this, we performed a qualitative assessment. Here we delved deeper into specific factors for each country. These included looking at different application use cases for gensets, the quality of electricity supply in the country, the policy landscape that supported A, the use of gensets in the country, as well as B, the transition to renewable energy. We also looked at the market maturity of renewable energy alternatives to gensets, as well as the supply chain dynamics to support this kind of shift. Lastly, we looked at access to financing and consumer willingness to pay in all these countries. This qualitative layer provided crucial context to the quantitative rankings we had generated earlier. Our final recommendations for the priority countries for ZGen, you can see on the screen, they are India, Philippines, Nepal, Bangladesh, and Maldives. These were the top 5 LMICs that came out of the 2-step framework we used, including strong quantitative scores that were further refined by qualitative research, and we leveraging our institutional experience to add any qualifiers if required. Additional criteria that we looked at included looking at co-benefits, geographical diversity, political stability, conducive macroeconomic conditions, and the overall impact footprint of a transition to clean gensets. It's worth noting that Bangladesh was not considered at the time for a further deep dive due to the political instability that plagued the region last year. Now that we've seen how we narrowed down from 24 countries to our final list, let's take a closer look at these 4. The 4 countries we've chosen for intervention represent critical fossil fuel genset use cases, marked by unreliable grids, high fossil fuel genset reliance, and strong transition potential. We target countries where fossil fuel to renewable energy shift will deliver the most impact across dimensions such as GHG emission reduction, health outcomes, as well as livelihood improvements. First, with India, with over 1 million genset units, the drivers here are a weak and unreliable grid, which leave nearly 300 million people without 24/7 power. India offers the largest GHG emission reduction potential and socioeconomic impact potential among the 27 LMIC studied, with an estimated multi-billion liters of fuel savings and the potential to impact millions of rural livelihoods from a switch from gensets to clean energy alternatives. Next, we looked at Maldives, which has an approximate fleet size of about 2,000 genset units. Its dispersed islands, high costs, and limited land area favor diesel generation. In fact, 95% of Maldives' electricity is generated from imported diesel, making it among the top 5 most expensive electricity tariffs in Asia. The clean transition here is crucial for directly cutting emissions, reducing a significant fuel import bill that accounts for nearly 10% of all imports in the country, and also mitigating climate risks that the Maldives faces. Then we looked at Nepal, which has roughly 28,000 to 30,000 genset units. Its challenging hilly terrain limits grid access, and a critical issue is the seasonality of hydropower, which accounts for nearly 97% of its on-grid electricity generation. However, a crucial downside of this hydropower is that it can reduce by nearly 30% in generation for 5 to 6 months each year in the dry season. Gensets fill the seasonal gap in Nepal, and our interventions can enable a clean transition in these hard-to-reach, climate-vulnerable geographies. Finally, we looked at the Philippines. With an estimated 75,000 genset units, this archipelago of 7,000 islands is prone to frequent typhoons and natural disasters, making diesel the most reliable option for many. Clean energy solutions here are urgently needed for the 10% of the population that remains unelectrified by the national grid. In essence, these countries represent unique, critical fossil fuel genset use cases that collectively demonstrate immense potential for impactful clean energy transitions. Moving on to the technological solution. Our analysis clearly shows that solar plus storage is leading the shift away from fossil fuel gensets, offering a reliable, flexible, and increasingly affordable pathway across all 4 countries and a diverse set of use cases in these countries. Our approach emphasizes that tech choices must match specific country contexts. These solutions need to reflect local realities, which range all the way from space constraints, import duties, to specific energy needs and viable business models that vary from region to region and use case to use case. Solar PV, including rooftop solar, is a proven and scalable technology that is viable for most use cases across countries as per our analysis. Battery energy storage systems, or BESS for short, are critical for enabling backup power and peak shaving, especially given the intermittency of solar. Battery prices are expected to drop by nearly 30 to 40% in the medium term, making BESS an increasingly attractive option to replace gensets as part of a larger tech solution to transition use cases away from fossil fuel gensets. For agriculture-focused regions like India and Nepal, solar-powered irrigation pumps, or SPIPs for short, are showing major impact, with pay-as-you-go models gaining significant traction to bridge the affordability and accessibility gap. These provide reliable and clean power for essential farming needs while enhancing farmer incomes and delivering significant positive gender outcomes, I might add. Unique island conditions across the APAC region, as seen in the Maldives, highlight the potential for floating solar, wave, and ocean energy technologies, particularly valuable in these nations where land comes at a premium. Similarly, productive use solar applications show strong promise in remote and rural contexts, where electrification and the shift away from costly fossil fuel-based generation can transform livelihoods and generate significant co-benefits. These examples of these technologies range from solar milk chillers for rural India to fresh produce processing units and ice making units in island nations for fisheries. So now we're going to deep dive into each of the 4 countries. And before we do so for Philippines, let me quickly outline how we've structured the analysis for each country. So we'll start by looking at the key factors in each country that are driving high genset dependence and identify the segments in each of these countries most ready for a transition away from fossil fuel gensets. Then we'll look at the enabling policy environment and any barriers that still exist that potentially need to be addressed while we're looking to transition these segments away from gensets. Next, we'll spotlight the pioneers, enterprises, financiers, and other bodies that are already leading the shift in their respective countries. And finally, we'll share the top 2 or 3 priority interventions for different ecosystem players, ranging from RE enterprises and financiers to donors and technical experts that can accelerate the move away from gensets in that market. Now that that's out of the way, let's shift our attention to the Philippines. Its geography with over 7,000 dispersed islands, combined with a poor grid infrastructure and vulnerability to frequent natural disasters like typhoons, about 20 a year, leaves approximately 4 million households underpowered and heavily reliant on gensets as their only source of power. Commercial and industrial users, or CNI users for short, including typical use cases like BPOs, factories, malls, and IT services firms, which are promising segments for the country's economy, also depend on gensets due to the poor quality and unreliability of grid power. A report back from the early 2020s and late 2010s highlighted that about 40% of the firms in the Philippines own some kind of a genset, highlighting the critical need for backup power in the country. The Philippines also faces some of the highest electricity costs in Asia. This, coupled with the reliance on imported diesel for power generation, creates a very strong economic case for transitioning to clean genset alternatives. The main segment for intervention in the Philippines are quite clear. The first would be non-critical CNI. Many of these users already rely on gensets for backup power, and their higher willingness to pay for reliable power that makes them ideal candidates for PV plus storage solutions to deliver them lower operational costs and a reduction in downtime in operations. On the other hand, we're also looking at off-grid and underserved communities in the Philippines. Compared to the CNI users, their paying capacity is slightly lower. However, the core benefits and social economic impact of transitioning this segment away from gensets are significant, including livelihood outcomes, and better gender outcomes. These communities often depend entirely on gensets and are too scattered to make grid expansion viable, making RE mini grids and productive use equipment the most suitable path to total electrification for this segment. For example, in 2022 alone, the country of Philippines imported over 21,000 gensets, which is a strong sign of the strong market that renewable gensets can tap into, and that showcases the demand already for backup solutions in the Philippines. We'll now look at some of the policy enabling factors and the barriers in the Philippines, as well as highlighting the pioneers that are working in the country to solve this problem of clean gensets, of transitioning to clean gensets, my bad. On the policy side, the government of Philippines is actively building a supportive ecosystem for renewable energy. A major priority for the government is electrifying underserved off-grid areas with RE solution, recognizing the high cost of diesel power generation in these regions. The National Total Electrification Roadmap targets 3.67 million unserved households to be electrified by 2028, with at least 50% of off-grid electricity in these regions coming from renewables. The country's NDC emphasizes partnerships with development finance institutions, or DFIs for short, and relies heavily on the private sector to deliver new renewable energy capacity, a clear sign that this transition in the Philippines will be a private-led transition, given the limits of public financing in the country. To support this, the Public-Private Partnership Center in the Philippines, an anchor body of the Philippines government, oversees a 100 billion plus project pipeline, with renewable energy identified as a priority sector for this government body. However, there are still significant barriers in the Philippines. One that we've already touched upon is the limitations of public financing and a lack of direct subsidies for renewable energy in the country. This, as well as the existing tariff structures, will continue to favor fossil fuel gensets, reduce the economic incentives for users of gensets to switch to cleaner alternatives. However, even with these challenges, several flagship projects are demonstrating innovative business models and shaping the RE landscape in the Philippines. A successful example of the PPP model, which is quite relevant for the renewable energy ecosystem in the Philippines, is the Quezon City Schools project, which has successfully solarized 50 public schools via the PPP delivery model, saving the municipality over $750,000 to $1 million annually in electricity costs. Similarly, the Terra Solar project, a landmark project by a private player, is set to become the world's largest, or among the world's largest, solar plus BESS projects, with an impressive 4,500 megawatt hour of battery energy storage, showcasing the country's ambition for utility-scale RE to supplement its aging grid. The financing landscape in the Philippines is also evolving, with the government of the Philippines actively looking to channel private funds into renewable energy. The government is building an ecosystem for startups, with several agencies launching grant programs and accelerators to target startups in various stages and solving various problems. A landmark initiative is the Startup Innovation Act, which identifies renewable energy and storage as key priority areas for its funding and accelerator support. It supports the sector of clean tech through grants and programs like Technicom, which are designed to help startups in critical fields such as energy storage and renewable energy, with grants and acceleration support. Complementing these public efforts to support startups are the VC and corporate VC landscape in the Philippines, which are playing an increasingly important role in financing. They are also looking to shift their focus towards clean tech, signaling their interest in the sector's growing market potential. Finally, recent regulatory changes now allow 100% foreign ownership in RE projects, a major shift that opens substantial opportunities for international investors and provides greater flexibility in financing for enterprises that want to work in the Philippines. Altogether, this mix of enabling policies, ambitious projects led by the government in conjunction with the private players, evolving financing mechanisms, and regulatory reforms is building strong momentum for the shift away from gensets in the Philippines. Now that we've seen the policy landscape and the market pioneers, let's talk about how ZGen can accelerate the transition in the Philippines. And we've structured these interventions across three key stakeholder groups. First, we talk about the enterprises. One of the biggest opportunities is in deploying mini and microgrids in off-grid areas in the Philippines. This addresses the root issue of unreliable or non-existent electricity, moving communities from just a few hours of power a day to round-the-clock electricity supply. But it's not just about technology in the Philippines. The business model or the financing model is equally important. By scaling pay-as-you-go renewable energy models through partnerships with fintech companies, ZGen can leverage the Philippines' high digital payment penetration and the large pool of fintech-focused VC funding that Philippine enterprise in the fintech space attract to make clean energy more affordable and accessible for the millions that do not have access to regular electricity. Next, we talk about commercial financiers. There's a major opportunity to unlock capital flows into renewables. Today, about 3 to 5% of bank loan portfolios go to renewable energy projects. By offering de-risking mechanisms like first loss guarantees, commercial financiers can give local banks the confidence to expand in this space, especially for consumer-facing financing facilities for commercial and industrial users. Beyond that, creating off-grid renewable energy-focused funds with local VCs can help fill the early-stage funding gap for enterprises operating in remote and underserved markets in the Philippines. And finally, for ecosystem actors, think of donors, philanthropies, consultants, energy experts, and other technical experts. There are two things that can make a big difference in the Philippines. First is capacity building. That is training local technicians and O&M providers to maintain and optimize renewable energy systems, especially newer technologies like battery energy storage, and for use cases in the remote regions where access to technicians is not easy as it is in the capital region of the country. Without this local expertise, even well-deployed systems risk falling short. Second would be insurance innovation, collaborating with insurers to design products that protect renewable energy assets against natural disaster damage. In a country as climate vulnerable as the Philippines, climate-proofing solutions is essential for long-term success. By bridging these targeted actions together, ZGen can strengthen the existing momentum of renewable energy in the Philippines and help the Philippines move from isolated clean energy successes to a more systemic nationwide shift away from gensets. Now let's turn our attention to the Maldives. The country's energy profile is heavily skewed. 95% of its electricity is generated using imported diesel, like we've already covered. This fossil fuel dependence creates unsustainable costs, with fossil fuel-based generation costing amongst the highest in Asia, up to $1 per kilowatt hour. Furthermore, diesel-based generation costs nearly 2 to 3 times higher than the regional average on smaller islands that are away from the main capital island of Greater Malé. Yet, these costs also present a clear opening for renewable energy firms. In fact, some of the most diesel-intensive niches, like luxury resorts, are already making the shifts, driven by strong economic pressures. We've identified two priority segments for the intervention, with a focus on tourism, the backbone of the Maldivian economy and a major driver of its energy demand. Firstly, we look at luxury resorts. With an approximate 800 units of gensets, or about 160 megawatts of genset capacity, resorts operate as primary power sources with 18 to 24 hours of electricity generated using gensets. They face ESG pressures and, more importantly, do not receive any government fuel subsidies. Their quicker decision cycles make them ideal for PV plus storage and diesel microgrids in the near term, with a long-term switch to fully RE systems. Switching to RE offers them significant cost savings, at least 2% lower levelized cost of electricity than diesel-based generation, while aligning with the corporate net zero goals that their parent companies are subject to. In line with this focus on tourism, we look at water transport fleets of these resorts and other tourism-aligned activities. There are about 1,700 boats in this segment that consume large volumes of petrol annually for guest transport and logistics. The oversight that they face from the government is minimal, but there is significant potential for hybrid or electric transitions using solar hybrid boats or e-boats with dockside chargers. Such a shift could save potentially 60 million liters of fuel annually in the Maldives. That translates to about $55 million in savings. Overall, while diesel gensets cost nearly 8x less upfront than solar plus storage solutions, clean alternatives offer nearly 2x lower levelized cost of electricity when looking at the lifetime of both solutions. This strong economic case, combined with the unsustainable nature of this current FFG dependence in Maldives, positions these resorts as a strong candidate for significant clean energy transition. Like we did for Philippines, we look at the policy landscape in the Maldives and cover the pioneers that are working in the segment. So the government of Maldives has already committed to reaching around 33% of renewable energy by 2030. This was part of a recent NDC that they released, I think, in February of 2025. But the progress that they've made is gradual. Their NDC targets are conditional on international support, both for technologies as well as financing, reflecting the country's heavy reliance on DFIs and foreign direct investment due to the limited availability of domestic capital. On the policy side, there are enabling measures that are creating space for clean energy growth. Chief among these is the 100% import duty exemption for renewable energy components, and the government's intent to rationalize the annual fuel subsidies of around $60 million, which is 1% of GDP, which is a significant strain on its FX reserves. However, there are barriers for clean energy growth in the Maldives as well. The RE sector is heavily dependent on international finance, with limited direct subsidies for private sector players. This means that while ambition exists in the country, scaling RE adoption requires targeted interventions to address financing and implementation gaps. Along these policy dynamics, several pioneers are already showcasing viable pathways for transition. One such adopter of renewable energy is the Holiday Inn Resort at Kanduma, which has installed 500 kilowatts of rooftop solar, and they've also piloted about 20 kilowatts of wave energy, demonstrating the early appetite that these resorts and private sector players have for early adoption of hybrid RE solutions, and the willingness that they have to even test out nascent technologies as a potential to replace their existing fossil fuel genset solutions. There are a few players that are working in the Maldives. One such player that we would like to highlight is Renewable Energy Maldives, which is an established RE firm actively working with these resorts and other CNI users, while also exploring emerging solutions like floating solar and e-mobility, e-mobility on water, I may add, which would be particularly important for countries like Maldives and similar island nations. In addition to this firm, there are others like SwimSol, which are offshoots of European enterprise that are working extensively with resorts in the Maldives to add renewable energy solutions and transition them away from fossil fuel gensets. The broader financing landscape for the Maldives, particularly outside the resort sector, is heavily supported by DFIs in the RE space. The Preparing Outer Island Sustainable Electricity Development Project, or POISED for short, backed by ADB, SCF, and others, has channeled around $127 million towards replacing gensets on the outer islands of Maldives. By outer islands, we mean the non-capital region islands, and they are targeting replacement of gensets with solar diesel battery hybrid systems. And pilots and demo projects that have been installed so far have already achieved fuel savings of around 28%. Along similar lines, the Aspire and Arise program, led by the World Bank and the Clean Tech Fund, have mobilized around 180 million since 2014. And the chief goal of this is to attract private RE investment through PPAs, mega guarantees, and demonstration of novel RE technologies to build investor confidence and to get foreign investments into Maldives. There are a few local financing solutions as well, like the Bank of Maldives, which offers green loans of up to USD 1.3 million for RE installations. However, there is limited domestic capital in the Maldives. Despite these geographic and infrastructure constraints, including a dispersed island network and an outdated grid, the falling costs of these solar plus diesel hybrids and emerging ocean energy technologies are paving the way for a cleaner and more resilient power mix for the Maldives. Given the Maldivian context, ZGen can focus on a set of practical high-impact interventions with tourism as the natural anchor for early action in the country. For enterprises, the priority is to leverage scale and the existing willingness of the hospitality sector as the early inroads. Large hotel groups, many of which own multiple resorts, can be used to aggregate RE demands across their properties. By working directly with these groups, ZGen-aligned enterprises can help bundle projects into sizes attractive enough for foreign EPCs and financiers, accelerating RE deployment. In parallel, enterprises can work with resorts to pilot water-based e-mobility. This can be anywhere from hybrid boats to solar-assisted ferries as secondary pathways to cut fossil fuel use in the hospitality sector. For commercial financiers, the opportunity lies in co-investing. This can be alongside DFIs and MDB programs that are already active in the Maldives. Co-funding grid strengthening projects is critical to address the country's aging electricity infrastructure and enable higher RE penetration at a nation level. Similarly, co-funding utility scale BESS initiatives will help close the storage gap, improve overall RE uptake, and strengthen the financial position of the state utility companies, which have been languishing for a while. For ecosystem actors, there is targeted innovation and capacity building will be key. Donors can back regional research institutions and universities, such as OIST, to pilot larger scale ocean energy projects. With a technical potential of nearly 106 megawatts, wave energy offers continuous generation that complements solar, especially given the constraint of land and the premium at which land comes at in a country like Maldives. Donors can also invest in training programs that build the technical capacity of local RE players, ensuring maintenance and servicing expertise is available on island, especially in those islands that are away from the greater Malay or the capital region. And this will sustain the long-term impact of deployed RE systems. By leveraging the private sector's readiness to invest, building on ongoing DFI-led programs, tapping into the Maldives' unique economic and geographic strengths, ZGen can help fast-track a transition that begins with the private sector and sets the stage for a commercially viable, environmentally sustainable shift nationwide. Now we move on to India, which we see as the world's largest backup power market, which is now ripe for a clean energy transition across 5 priority segments. India's energy profile is marked by systemic power deficits and an unreliable grid, which drives the need for backup power, especially in the commercial and industrial use cases, critical use cases, and for rural use cases. Nearly 300 million people in India still lack access to 24/7 electricity. The country's fossil fuel genset fleet exceeds 100 gigawatts, with nearly 80 to 85% of that fleet being used as a backup solution. FFG-driven generation is already twice expensive as clean alternatives when considering levelized cost of electricity in India across use cases. And this economic case for replacement is only getting stronger as battery prices are projected to fall over the coming years. We have prioritized 5 segments in India based on their fleet size, their genset usage, and their GHG emissions share. So firstly, we have the hospitality segment. This segment has a large fleet size and of about 160,000 units. These are high-end users with a high willingness to pay that are driven by ESG goals, and they would be ripe for transition to storage plus solar solutions. Similarly, we have the industrial users. They also have a very large genset fleet size, and they have amongst the highest GHG emissions share. They are ripe for transition to solar plus storage solutions or solar solutions, especially with the upcoming time of day tariffs, which makes storage more economically viable in this use case. Then we have a very unique use case in India, which is the construction segment. There are around 14 to 15,000 gensets which are used in construction, often with high operational hours. For a lot of construction sites, gensets are the only source of power. They require mobile solar generators, which is the ideal solution for them. They require something which can be used temporarily while giving them high capacity power. While the first 3 segments offered very high GHG emissions reductions, the other 2 segments offer significant co-benefits while offering GHG emissions reduction as well. The first one we look at are the rural commercial segments. This segment uses a lot of gensets. However, these are of smaller sizes, electrifying micro enterprises and providing productive use equipment such as solar milk chillers delivers high co-benefits in the segment. These include improved livelihoods, reduced operating costs, and enhanced product quality while addressing critical unmet needs of the segment in rural India. We also looked at agriculture with an estimated 10 million diesel pumps. This segment has high fuel usage and dispersed operations. Solar-powered irrigation pumps provide a high impact, feasible solution which is driven by policy support via the PM Kusum scheme, a flagship scheme of the government which offers significant subsidy support for users that are transitioning away from diesel pumps. The future looks promising in India as solar and battery costs are falling due to rapidly growing domestic production capacities, which makes RE alternatives increasingly competitive and accessible across diverse segments in India. At the highest level, the government of India has set a 2030 target of about 500 gigawatts of renewable energy capacity. And I think recently there was a news article which suggested that about half of this capacity has already been met. Of 500 gigawatts of capacity, nearly solar is expected to contribute around a half. This commitment to renewable energy is reinforced by a new national carbon market framework, which will soon allow the trading of carbon credits. For enterprises and financiers, this opens the door to alternative financing models, potentially making genset projects more bankable and providing accessibility and affordability for users that might not be able to afford the solution as is. However, significant barriers remain in India. The first is that the FFG market is still largely unregulated, with no binding phase-out timelines or emission caps, meaning diesel remains the default choice for backup power. Subsidy delivery in India is also inconsistent, with state-level delays and weak enforcement limiting access, particularly for small and medium enterprises that require subsidies to make renewable energy solutions affordable. That said, India's clean energy transition is being driven by enterprises that are developing scalable technologies and business models that address these gaps and make renewable energy solutions more accessible for diverse use cases. Players like Agni Solar, a market leader with over 30 years in developing innovative mobile solar generators, or containers as they call it, for the construction sector to meet temporary and off-grid energy needs, while also working with social enterprises to scale solar milk chillers in rural India. Beyond these, numerous deep tech enterprises like Vimano, the energy company, and Urja are creating advanced material and AI-led solutions specifically targeting renewable energy generation and energy storage, making batteries and energy systems more efficient, especially for the Indian context. The financing landscape in India is also playing a critical role in this transition, with various players offering a suite of services tailored to the Indian context. Venture capital firms like Avana Capital and Special Invest are actively funding Indian deep tech firms with a focus on clean energy, indicating a growing interest in climate-focused investments. Enterprises like Orb Energy provide end-to-end solutions encompassing financing, which is around 12%, engineering, procurement, and construction, and maintenance services, making it far easier for businesses to adopt renewables without high upfront cost. Orb is one of the few one among many enterprises that are offering these services. Complementing these efforts are the robust RE supply chains in India, backed by the production-linked incentives, which are projecting self-reliance for solar modules by 2026 and a nearly 4 to 8x increase in battery manufacturing capacity by 2030 that are further boosting the accessibility and affordability of clean tech solutions in India. This strong domestic manufacturing ecosystem, combined with the innovative financing and enterprise models, positions India as a powerhouse for the clean energy transition. To accelerate India's clean energy transition, the immediate focus needs to be on three levers: financing, training, and targeted technology pilots, each with clear roles for different stakeholder groups. For enterprises, the priority is to demonstrate impact through large-scale proof-of-concept projects and to test alternative financing models. Solar plus battery storage pilots for MSMEs or medium, small, and micro enterprises can showcase cost savings and operational reliability, helping overcome hesitation among CNI users in industrial clusters and driving adoption at the cluster level, which will lower operational costs of designing and delivering RE deployments in the sector. Similarly, scaling solar-powered irrigation pumps and rural productive use equipment like solar milk chillers can deliver strong livelihood outcomes and co-benefits, making the transition compelling for rural communities by working actively with self-help groups and farmer producer organizations, which have extensive networks in rural India. For commercial financiers, the opportunity lies in enabling adoption through innovative financing models. Working capital support for PAYGO and OPEX model can unlock uptake in rural and SME markets for renewable energy, where upfront costs still remain a barrier, and there is a lack of access to formalized banking. There's also a scope to co-invest in deep tech energy and storage ventures that are developing next-gen solutions. This would close the early stage funding gap for emerging technologies in India, especially at the TRL 1 to 5 level. For ecosystem actors, the targeted capacity building is key. Business advisors and technical energy experts can work with banks to expand their lending capacity beyond solar, equipping them to finance storage, small-scale wind, and other impactful technologies that will emerge over the years. Donors can partner with vocational institutions to establish technician training networks, ensuring skilled local labor is available for installation and maintenance, which is a constant challenge in peri-urban regions in India. This is a factor that would be critical for sustaining the trust and adoption of renewable energy systems when compared to the reliance of diesel gensets. By focusing on these areas, ZGen can effectively bridge critical gaps in the Indian market, foster a more robust RE ecosystem, and drive widespread adoption of clean energy solutions. Finally, we're going to be covering the last country as part of our deep dive, Nepal. While hydropower meets an impressive 97% of the country's grid demand, this heavy reliance creates a serious vulnerability. Generation drops by nearly 30% for 5 to 6 months every year due to the dry season. In those months, gensets become the main backup for commercial and industrial users, and they sustain demand for diesel as part of irrigation practices in the agricultural space. It's worth noting that as early as back in the early 2010s, access to electricity in Nepal was extremely poor. Many households and businesses relied on gensets for nearly 14 to 18 hours a day. This changed through policy reforms that significantly expanded the country's generation capacity. However, while access has improved in Nepal so far, reliability gaps still remain. Even outside the capital, load shedding of 10 to 15% is still common. The ongoing energy gap in Nepal drives high genset imports, nearly 18 million worth annually, and makes a strong case for clean energy alternatives. Two segments stand out for high impact interventions in Nepal. First, the CNI sector. These are an estimated 7,000 gensets here with 1,000 megawatts of backup capacity. Industries like steel, pharma, and plastics, which are nationally relevant for the economy, face high tariffs and unreliable electricity supply. Their mainly daytime loads make them ideal for rooftop solar in the short term, transitioning to solar plus storage in the long term as battery taxes are rationalized. Switching could cut their power costs by nearly 10 to 15% and improve operational continuity. The second segment we looked at is agriculture, specifically irrigation. Nepal has around 80,000 to 100,000 diesel pumps, accounting for more than 10% of national diesel and petrol use. Farmers face limited diesel access, high cost of generation and diesel access, and low productivity use due to unreliable irrigation. Solar-powered irrigation pumps, both small individual systems and larger community models, can triple farmer output and increase incomes while cutting fuel use, directly addressing a national challenge of lower farmer productivity. The goal in Nepal is clear: shift these sectors towards renewables to cut costs, build resilience, and secure livelihoods. Achieving a full replacement of gensets in Nepal will require a multi-pronged approach, combining grassroots engagement with strong institutional support. On the policy side, the government is taking proactive steps. A proposed green tax on fossil fuels aims to curb genset use, and there's a strong subsidy framework for renewable energy projects, often backed by DFIs. Nepal's updated NDC commits to increasing RE capacity fivefold to 15 gigawatts by 2030, with 10 to 15% of that coming from solar, wind, and mini micro hydro. However, there are notable barriers. Chief among them is high battery import taxes, currently around 43 to 45%. This significantly reduces the viability of battery energy storage systems, which are critical for improving reliability. Public financing for RE is limited, with a high dependence on DFI funds, which leads to significant underfunding of subsidy programs that are run in the country. Frequent policy changes in the RE sector add further uncertainty for investors and implementers. However, even with these barriers, we're seeing strong momentum on the ground. Local enterprises and community-led models are proving that renewable energy can work in Nepal's unique context and can deliver both economic and social benefits. Gampar, a major renewable energy provider, serves CNI customers in nationally relevant economies, and it's helping them lower energy costs and operational risks by transitioning them to renewable energy systems. They have also deployed solar-powered irrigation pumps through microfinance partnerships in rural Nepal. Another initiative by LI or the LI Bird solar-powered irrigation pump pilot was able to reach nearly 185 households across 12 installations in Nepal, leading to a nearly 3x improvement in farmer incomes through their increased ability to put in high value crops and reduce irrigation costs, demonstrating that the value of tailored community driven solutions in Nepal. The financing landscape is also robustly supported by DFIs in Nepal. NMB Bank, a large Nepalese bank, runs a flagship green banking program, which offers renewable energy loans at 5 to 7% interest when backed by concessional DFI capital. They are seeing a growing interest in CNI users for rooftop solar and other renewable energy solutions. Team Ventures, a domestic private equity fund, invests heavily in renewable energy enterprises and has backed the first firm in Nepal to register IREX, an important alternative financing model for renewable energy. There has been precedence of DFIs also deploying funds in local impact investing firms to finance renewable energy projects and firms. With clear capacity targets and a strong subsidy framework on paper and active private and DFI players, Nepal has a strong foundation for accelerating the transition, but addressing high battery costs, taxes, improving policy stability, and ensuring consistent funding will remain the key to unlocking its full potential. To effectively accelerate the transition in Nepal, we see two key technology entry points: solar-powered irrigation pumps and battery energy storage pilots. Both address urgent needs while building market confidence in renewable energy. For enterprises, there's a big opportunity to partner with NGOs and local solution providers to scale solar pumps. We know demonstration works. In regional projects, 95% of applications came from people who had seen the technology in action. Expanding community financing models for these pumps, like PayGo or Water as a Service, can make them more accessible and affordable. Providing working capital to these deployers will help overcome the high upfront cost barrier that farmers typically face. For financiers, concessional debt to commercial banks can unlock affordable loans for rooftop solar in the CNI segment where there is a growing interest. There's also scope to co-invest in early-stage RE ventures, which helps address the funding gap in Nepal's still nascent VC/PE landscape. And for wider ecosystem actors, including donors, philanthropies, and policy groups, two actions stand out. First, channeling capital to microfinance institutions for solar pump lending, since MFIs are critical for reaching rural customers in the last mile, but often lack the liquidity to meet demand. Second, working with enterprises and policy groups to advocate for a reduction in high battery import taxes, which are currently around 45%. This will significantly impact storage viability and increase adoption of renewable energy systems in Nepal and reduce the dependence on gensets. By focusing on these targeted interventions and aligning enterprises, financiers, and ecosystem actors, ZGen can help Nepal build on its existing strengths, address critical barriers, and move towards a more energy resilient future. To conclude, let's take a step back and bring together the cross-cutting insights from our deep dives. What we've seen is clear. The shift from fossil fuel generators is no longer a distant goal. It's already underway, and in many markets, it's starting to scale. First, there's a strong economic case for RE. In all our target countries, RE solutions consistently demonstrate at least 2x lower levelized cost of electricity than gensets. This economic advantage is further strengthened by rising global fuel costs and falling battery prices. Second, the private sector is ready and actively leading this transition. CNI users across India, the Maldives, Nepal, and Philippines are proving to be early adopters. They are primarily motivated by clear benefits: significant cost savings, improved operational uptime, and an adherence to growing ESG goals. In the Maldives, for example, resorts are a prime example, driving renewable energy adoptions without any significant government subsidies. Third, innovative business models are successfully lowering entry barriers. Models like PayGo for rural and agriculture segments are proving effective in Nepal and India, enabling access to technology for farmers and small businesses by reducing upfront capital expenditure. Similarly, OPEX or RESCO models for CNI customers in Nepal, India, Philippines help reduce capital outlays and operational hassles, making RE more accessible for these users as well. Lastly, demonstration projects are crucial for building trust and accelerating adoption. Successful pilots, whether it's solarizing schools in the Philippines or deploying pumps in Nepal or India, or deploying battery storage systems in industrial clusters in India, create powerful social proof. This in turn helps drive peer adoption, attract further financing, and builds confidence in the reliability and benefits of renewable energy solutions across diverse contexts. The path forward is clear. Empower the private sector, foster innovative business models, test the viability of alternative financing mechanisms, and champion impactful demo projects. Together, these levers can move us from isolated successes to a systemic shift away from gensets in the APAC region. Thank you all for your time today. We'll now hand it back to Lily, who will share the call to action and the role each of us can play in driving this transition forward. Thank you all.
Great, many thanks, Vikram, and to the whole IntelliCap team for a really wonderful piece of research. Yeah, these slides are only a summary of the depth of information, so thank you all for your hard work on it. I'd like to just finally run through briefly the call to action. So next slide, please. As outlined, there's a ton of challenges that we face in trying to create this transition, but also a ton of opportunity. Oh, sorry, one more slide, I think. And it's just to say that at ZGen, we are committed to, I guess, increasing the number of sessions and like this, where we can share lessons learned from other similar transitions and increasing access to open source data. We want to be prioritizing kind of localization and partnerships to make sure that these things are rooted in need. And believe that through that partnership, it needs to be a multi-pronged cross-sector kind of holistic approach that we take to fixing these kind of barriers in combination. And we'd love to see an increase in commitments from players across the transition to this area, because we do believe there's a great opportunity. So thanks very much for attending today. We're now going to move to our Q&A. So please do use the Q&A chat. And I will head to that now to see what's been asked. So we've got a question in from, in fact, I'll ask an opening question while the questions flow in, just to kick things off. So the first question I have is, so you've mentioned one of the key things is to make these projects bankable. Are there any, how do we go about doing that, and what are the nuances between markets?
Vikramaditya, why don't you take a first crack and then I'll add on to your initial thoughts. Yeah.
I think what's critical for making these projects bankable is understanding and designing solutions that are contextualized to the local context of these countries and the use cases. I think over time, lowering battery costs and lowering costs of components, as well as designing solutions in a clustered manner, will reduce the complexities of the supply chain, which also increase the overall cost of these systems. So, Smit, would you like to add anything here?
Yeah. No, thanks, Vikramaditya. I think one of the critical pieces that you've highlighted is with respect to contextualization of the solution to the specific use case, as well as the the decreasing trend that we are seeing with respect to especially energy storage prices. But one other piece that will play a critical role is for every use case, there is an adopter, and the credibility of the adopter and their ability to service the payments linked to these solutions, as opposed to whatever savings they are generating from not doing certain things as part of otherwise baseline activity. That becomes critical as well. So bankability, I would say, depends on each of these three factors, and therefore need to be looked at by any solution developer, or for that matter, even a financier, before such an activity is financed.
Yeah, absolutely. And picking up on one of your points there around the kind of cost reductions that we've seen, we've got a question in from someone in the audience. Thanks, David Hartel, for putting one forward. We've spoken about the reduction or the forecast of reduction of cost for battery systems. Potentially, this isn't being seen in all markets, and potentially the small to medium markets. It would be good if we could comment a bit more on maybe the variety within that reduction and where we're seeing some of those costs being realized.
Right. I think, and Vikramaditya, you can come in with your thoughts as well. I think the reduction is being largely realized where the majority of the production lies, which is primarily China as we speak. But increasingly, countries in South Asia, like India, that we have covered as part of this presentation, is trying to build its own supply chain of battery manufacturing. And it's a fledgling ecosystem that India is trying to build further on. As this ecosystem builds, the government of the country has invested several millions of dollars towards incentivizing local manufacturing of these energy storage products. And the expectation is that once a minimum scale is realized in terms of local manufacturing capability, the reduction in prices that we are seeing globally will also translate into these local markets. At the same time, I think in a country like India, which has seen an explosion of solar installations, is increasingly seeing adoption of energy storage in pilot capacities across various use cases. And people and the overall ecosystem is becoming increasingly more knowledgeable on how to make each of these sort of use cases work better in terms of financing, better in terms of its technical performance. And therefore, going forward, as we are piloting more and more of these solutions in these smaller geographies, we would be able to see the reduction in prices being realized through both the user experiences as well as the in-house ability to sort of indigenize the supply chain and manufacturing of energy storage solutions.
Yeah, absolutely. I also think it's possibly something for donors to think of. There's been a couple of trials around bulk procurement and things for sectors as well. But yeah, all excellent points. To mention that we will be sharing the recording of this presentation online. So if anybody wants to head back to any of this, you will be able to. The next question, are there limits to market scalable options when it comes to generating climate resilient livelihoods? Must this market eventually merge with the government for scale to happen, especially in South Asia and China level scale?
Right. Interesting question. I think, Lily, I'll need you to repeat the second half of the question. So, I mean, it might be useful to just to sort of repeat the entire piece once again.
Yeah, of course. So the second half of the question is, must the market eventually merge with the government for scale to happen, especially in South Asia and China level scale? I think perhaps the way I read this might be incorrect, is that I guess the government has different levels of influence in different markets potentially on these sectors. So it would be interesting to speak more about the how much can solutions become scalable without that support from government, perhaps, unless of course someone's interpreted it differently.
Right.
Utsav, I see your hands up.
Yeah, Utsav, go ahead. I'll add more.
Yeah, no, so just it's coming from the kind of research we did during the course of all the multiple consultations we had. The 2 points which I can definitely remark here. One is the fact that in each of these countries, when we are looking at Maldives, particularly Nepal as well, a lot of these projects are so when we talk about the transitioning out of fossil fuel generators and the integration or the larger penetration behind solar energy or solar energy related solutions, a lot of these projects are also piloted or partnered with or initiated by development agencies, for example, the World Bank and the likes, right? So, what happens is that a lot of these agencies are now partnering with local government or state governments or subnational governments as well to pilot technologies, fund those initiatives as well, and that actually helps with the point number two, which I was trying to make, is the initial capex for behind every technology which has to be sort of installed, which is usually at a higher end. So Vikramaditya in his presentation also mentioned two figures in between, that it may probably, to begin with, may be expensive in terms of setting up a technology which replaces fossil fuel generators. However, over the lifespan of the use of these technologies might be far cheaper, probably 2x cheaper is what we remarked, Vikramaditya, as well. So from that perspective, even if it is for a small and medium market use case, and for example, for even smaller use cases, it may probably be cheaper as well, and over the lifespan. And definitely the government, if we talk about even public finance institutions of these respective countries, have been designing already a lot of concessional financing lending products as well, for both from a producer lens and also from a consumer lens. So the people who are the enterprises which are actually producing these solutions, and at the same time consumers who are looking to benefit out of these alternative energy solutions, have been benefiting from low cost financing and related financial products, which have been playing a crucial role in the early integration of these solutions in the markets. So I think these were 2 points which I just wanted to sort of highlight. But over to you, Sulsman.
Right. No, thanks, Utsav, for picking out a couple of threads from the research that we have been doing on these four countries. The only sort of broader point that I would like to add is perhaps China is not necessarily the model to ape going forward, especially for the four countries that we are talking about. Every country is unique in the way that the government may have more or less influence on how they can shape individual markets. But primarily for the four countries that we sort of covered as part of this exercise, we believe that it has to be a private sector-led initiative, which is able to attract and crowdsource commercial funders to come in and invest in bankable projects. So the idea that yes, at the early stages, initial stages, the government will perhaps have an influence and a role to play in terms of kick-starting the initial set of cohort of pilots, but eventually the expectation is that the private sector will take it and run with it. With those pilots having proven the business model on how to sort of scale them up. So, the long story short is potentially we are not trying to sort of replicate a Chinese model or a Chinese scale, but we are essentially trying to contextualize to the specific markets that we are talking about, and ensuring that there is enough of an incentive for the private sector to sort of come forward and make a play out of this particular segment, which is that of transitioning fossil fuel generators to the alternative solutions. Yeah.
Just Susmit, on that note, wanted to pick up, Lily, another question, which is also, I think, a question after in the chat, which is the role of philanthropy in driving the uptake of solutions. Actually, sort of a related point, because when we talk about the initial, so funding new innovations and early enterprises which are actually innovating in clean energy solutions, replacing fossil fuel generators, require that kind of initial catalytic patient funding as well, to develop their technologies, do pilots and POCs. And philanthropies have been, proven to play a critical role in sort of channelizing those efforts and further facilitating those efforts as well. That is at the stage of early commercialization of each of these enterprises which have been sort of innovating. And secondly, on the point of initial making it commercially viable in the initial go, also for the beneficiaries which are using these technologies, I think that kind of funding with co-financing opportunities are something which philanthropies have also sort of facilitated in the market, especially by partnering with marquee institutions which have been driving these kind of similar alternative energy integration related initiatives. So just 2 points on that thread as well.
Yes, great, thank you. Is there any further comments on that question of what can the role of philanthropic money play in this decarbonisation effort?
No, I think nothing more to add from my side at this moment. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the answer can be extremely broad. There's plenty that we're looking at on ZGen, from de-risking technologies to trying to figure out new procurement routes within healthcare and humanitarian settings. So yeah, I won't add more at this stage, but agree that it's a critical role, has a critical role to play. We've got, I guess, two more questions. So for anybody who's interested in finding out more about either ZGen or the data that underlies this presentation, do please get in touch. Thanks to Deepak in particular for reaching out. That sounds like a really interesting opportunity, so we'd love to speak to you about that. I'll pop my email to you, or you can find us on LinkedIn. And then the final question around sharing the technical details and credentials of gensets. Yes, we can publish some of our data around some of that. Our way of thinking about what we actually consider to be a generator, and this recording will be shared online, so you'll be able to see the details for each of the countries we've explored. I think we're at time, so thank you so much everybody for joining, and do get in touch if you want to find out any more information, or if you're interested in exploring partnerships, etc. Thanks again to the IntelliCap team for all the hard work. This has been a fantastic piece of research.